An affair the first time, or any affair, I suppose, when it happens, can genuinely be a mistake.
I remember getting in my car and driving away with this horrific feeling. I was just in my head, I'm an adulterer.
In one night, we've obliterated 2 fully functioning families.
I was being unfaithful 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I just felt like the future that I'd always wanted had been taken away from me.
I just carried on and on and on. I just carried on getting away with it.
In sickness and in health, for better, for worse, to honor and obey. I had a problem with that one, but I'm just kidding. Those were, the very traditional wedding vows. I meant them, they're meant to be for life. You go through marriage, life, turbulence, and you sometimes forget the words you said that day.
I think I'd always see myself as a pretty honourable chap. I liked being a good guy, if you like. My identity was driven by that. I think I was probably a typical, sort of slightly awkward teenager. Romantic relationships were quite difficult to come by. As I got a little bit older, I got a little bit more confident. I think my looks had changed a little bit. When I eventually qualified as a doctor, women were oppressed by the job that I did. I was being able to flirt with other women, which made me feel better. I had a serious long-term girlfriend, but I felt as though I was sort of torn between, do I try and continue a relationship with my girlfriend? Do I want to just be single and go and explore other things? I started to develop a little bit of a split in myself and felt as though maybe I was developing a slightly darker side.
I had a normal, stable marriage with 2 children. I'm working, I'm earning enough money. It's just a complete replica of what I was brought up around and entirely normal. Yet inside of me, it's far from normal. I was serially unfaithful to my wife on numerous occasions. Once the sex was over, then there came the come down. Getting out of the situation as quickly as possible, getting back to normality, what I called normality, getting home and making sure that I hadn't been caught.
Yeah, no, I'd been friends with my wife for years. She's a very beautiful, glamorous woman. I just loved her for years. She was my mate. There's no question to me that this was someone I could make a lifetime relationship with forever. Yeah. We were together for 6 or 7 years and then we got married. I never ever thought about having an affair, ever. I never looked at another woman, genuinely. I remember someone saying to me, so what if you and your wife ever split up? And I was like, that is never going to happen. I can tell you, absolutely, that will never happen.
The kids were about 17 when I actually found out that my life had been built on an illusion. It was like I just didn't know who this man was. I didn't know who my husband was anymore. It was like some imposter had invaded his body. He was my husband, and yet he didn't feel like my husband anymore.
I was very young. I was only 22. I was working in a cocktail bar, and all of a sudden the door opened and a man walked in, and I looked at him and I said, "This is the most beautiful man I have ever seen." Despite being with the father of my child, I just knew I had to have him. He stayed for hours and he was telling me that his relationship is coming to an end because they'd grown apart. Inside I was fist pumping like mad. So when I had the chance, I wrote my number on a napkin the third day he calls me.
What I would normally do, I would just try to be charming, entertaining, engaging, and also there was an element of me promoting my status as well. I made sure I did that. So I wasn't just a policeman, I was becoming a detective. And what I found is that girls like that.
I've never been the type of person to struggle getting boys to notice me. I have a big personality. I've always been this way. I've never really been single, to be fair. When I met my husband, he was like no one I'd ever met before. He was a gentleman. You know, he used to write me poetry. I'd get gifts in the post all the time, and he'd write poems and have them all framed with a picture of us. He was different. He was very different. And maybe it's a British thing, I don't know, because I've never had that kind of romance. It's always been, you know, about one thing or another.
I wanted to be a good boyfriend. It's just that I also wanted to have sex with other women. I was serially cheating up on her, usually having the form of casual relationships. So meeting somebody, having a casual physical relationship with them over a period of weeks. And I was actually quite brazen with some of the things that I did. There were times when there was other women's underwear left in my room. My girlfriend would be there and I would kind of spot it and have to sort of try and hide it away. The more I got away with it, that just fed into my belief that I could keep on getting away with it. And the sense of relief that that brought is probably one of the better feelings I've ever had, actually even better than having the sex in a way. It's the beginning of a pattern of behaviour that got more serious as it went on.
I didn't see my relationship with this man as an affair. I didn't feel that I was cheating because at the end of the day, all we were doing were long drives and talking. We were lying to people. We were trying to conceal our tracks. We really tried hard not to be seen together. And I can see that other people would say, yeah, that's cheating, that's having an affair.
You know, we had a really nice house, 2 dogs. And then, yeah, we had our first daughter in 2002 and then another one. In some ways, becoming a dad's the greatest thing I've ever experienced. But I think it was a classic case, which is, you know, very common, which is once we had kids, then she never left me for another man, but I felt kind of, oh, where have you gone once we had kids? And if you're a secure man, I think that's fine. And if you're not, which I wasn't, then I think it was problematic. And I think that's probably why I went and it all up.
I found myself in my early 30s, so around 32, suddenly on my own. I had this very successful corporate career, which could be highly pressurised at times, but I was really, really lonely. I'd stay late at work and work harder and longer, rather than kind of go home and face up to it.
There was a woman where I worked who, I think I was very blind to that there was even a flirtation going on. I was a therapist at this place and she was a trainee. I think she was a year younger than me. One day she said, look, could I have a chat? She said, there's something going on between us. I can feel it, you know. And I denied it flat. I kind of went into a panic. I was like, no, I don't fancy you. There's nothing going on here. For the next year, I kind of kept my distance, but felt an incredible pull towards her. It's like I'd really hoped to run into her in the dining room. And when we did, it would kind of, I'd get super adrenalized and charged up. We started texting, and that just opened another door. Yeah, no, I started to get really concerned, so I went to my wife and I said, look, this is going on. I don't feel good about this. And maybe it was even as a way of trying to get some attention back. Her response was, you ever speak to her again and the marriage is over.
Infidelity is always at the back of your mind, and it hits hardest in the middle of the night when there is a spouse next to you and all you can do is think about this other person, feeling guilty, extremely guilty on one side, and yet feeling elated with all the feelings that you have at the same time.
My friend persuaded me to download a dating app. I think my friend kind of challenged me, if you're on your own, you don't want to be on your own, you need to do something about it. And then I saw this guy. We matched each other. We went to a local bar. It sounds very old-fashioned again. Eyes met across the pub. And as I sat down, he gave me a huge hug, and I felt like I knew him already. I'd always had this idea of I'd like to be it sounds really old-fashioned, but wooed by someone. For me, it was kind of like that old-fashioned romance kind of swept off my feet, really. The word love came in about 3 dates, being really honest. It was all very fast, but it just felt like the right thing. Everyone that met him fell in love with him, as well as me.
I stayed away from the woman, but the charge just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I became obsessed with her. I ran into her, bumped into her, and it all came flooding back. We were both in agreement that we didn't want to fuck our lives up or anyone else's, that we liked each other, but nothing was ever going to happen, and we were going to be really adult about it and just walk away. And she went, no, that feels much better. And I was like, okay, great, thank you. Gave her a hug. That was that. It wasn't a hug, she was all over me. And I was all over her, so it was just like, bang. And we'd done this 2 hours of talking it through. I really thought I was in the clear. I remember getting in my car and driving away with this horrific feeling. I was just in my head, I'm an adulterer.
The day when I finally decided to tell the father of my child that I am leaving him for another man, I just simply said, I'm leaving you for another man. I can't do this anymore. I've been in love with him for months now, and I just think you and I can work. And it's not an easy thing to just say, I'm going, I'm leaving you, I'm taking our child with me. And as painful as it was, I was elated because finally I felt free to be with the man of my dreams.
Whilst my wife was pregnant with our first child, I joined the police force and I was wanting to become a detective. And as part of my training meant that I had to go away to a residential training school. There was a culture of, you've heard the phrase, what goes on tour stays on tour. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be seen to be one of the boys. And I saw a couple of girls who were dancing together. Towards the end of the night, as the slow dances came on, then I pulled her in for a slow dance, and we started kissing on the dance floor. And no words were said about what was to follow, but we left the nightclub together, and that was the first time that I was unfaithful to my wife. From then on, any chance that I had an opportunity to stay away from home, I would be looking for an opportunity to have a casual sexual encounter.
I was sat on the sofa next to him. I got a text from a friend that I hadn't heard from for quite a long time, saying, you do know, don't you? I said, what? He said, you do know that he's married. I rang my friend and he explained that he'd seen pictures of him and his wife on Facebook. He hadn't told me and also told his wife. I took some very deep breaths and then I just said to him, I know that you're married and I know about your other life. My choice was falling in love with a guy that I thought I had a future with. My choice wasn't being the other woman.
The affair then lasted about 4 or 5 months. I mean, I was kind of in a split personality of, going home, going to work, and then having this secret life on the side, and all the time kind of watching the part of me that was having the affair with kind of bafflement going, who the f at you. You know, where did you come from? I don't recognize you. I thought, really? You know, you're me? That's not me. I'd spent so much time pushing that away because that was my dad. He was always cheating on my mum. I know he was in bed with another woman the night I was born. He'd hit on anyone, you know. If I brought a girlfriend home, he'd hit on her. No, I always swore I'd never be anything like my dad. There was no option there. You know, I was going to be loyal, I was going to be committed in a relationship.
The first little while was great. You know, we did everything together as a family. Looking back where the trouble started, we had a series of traumas, you know, a stroke, mother-in-law's stroke, brother-in-law's stroke, and then there shortly after we lost a baby. And it just all became a bit too much. Obviously, I didn't know it at the time, but, you know, as a woman, you lose a baby, you think it's only happening to you, it's your body. My husband grieved, but wouldn't grieve with me because he felt he had to be strong for me. And that's when it all started to unravel. And that's when, I guess, a separation of sorts started.
The first night we spent together, there was all this passion and all this yearning and all this wanting, and it finally happened. It was absolutely magical. I will remember that night for the rest of my life. It kind of felt like that for a long, long time. In time, the relationship became volatile. And it kind of started to fall apart, partially because I felt that I was repeating a pattern of my parents' behavior. Because I could see them being completely in love and lovey-dovey, and then the next moment, it was gone, and they were shouting and throwing things on the floor and against the walls. And I said, that's just not how I imagined it.
I kept seeing this woman, and it was like we were both in this very forbidden situation, and that created an incredible bond. I think that's the truth of it. It's like we were both on this desert island together, and we were the only people in the world who knew this terrible thing we were doing, and it made us very, very close in a very toxic way. Part of my staying in it was, I think I freaked out. You know, I thought, if I piss her off, she's going to blow the whistle. And keeping seeing her, partly out of lust, but largely out of fear, I should have just knocked it on the head and walked away. My wife found an email. I got a voicemail when I came out of work late one night saying, I found an email. I know what's going on. I've changed the locks. Don't come home. And I felt so relieved. I felt so relieved. I guess it's like being on death row and getting an execution date. All right, the waiting's over. That just ended the marriage immediately. There was no negotiation, there was no discussion. And everything's...
So there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of anger and emotions. He started breaking down. He started telling me the reasons why his marriage wasn't where he wanted it to be, how in his mind it was over. Then he packed up his stuff and then he left. I didn't know if I was ever going to get any answers from him. And at the same time as he was going home to his wife, she was messaging me. This doesn't happen to people like me. This is on the Jeremy Kyle show, or this is in a magazine. This isn't my life. And yet it was. She asked me if I respected marriage, because if I did, I needed to leave him alone. To hear her pain was just awful. They had more of a life together. They had a marriage.
In the morning when he left, I was just speechless. Because I knew the love of my life is leaving. And I might never see him again. So he left. And I was heartbroken. That feeling lasted and stayed with me for months on end. And I didn't hear from him. And it was devastating. And in a way, I thought, that's what I've done to the person I left behind.
My wife, I think she was devastated. You know, it was not part of our plan. The worst part of the affair for me was I missed her, you know.
So with my second son, you know, my husband was equally as thrilled as I was. Obviously, he was very much planned. Yeah, everything was fine until our son turned 3 months old. And I just remember one night we were in the lounge. He decided he was going to go to bed early. And I just remember hearing his phone beep at midnight. And I thought, that's a funny time for a text message to be coming in. I've never looked at his phone. I've never read his emails, but I opened the text and really wish I hadn't. It was a graphic one. So it was this person who, I can't even say her name, but it was signed with her name, and basically telling him how much she missed him and what she wanted him to do to her next time they saw each other. I woke him up immediately, and I basically just said to him, who is the person's name? And he basically told me all about it, well, I knew where they met because I had introduced them. I used to work with her. I just wanted to throw up. I didn't know what else to do. I was shocked, and I was so hurt. I was absolutely hysterical, and I just said, you can get out. All I could think of was this text. I had it in my mind, replaying in my mind, and then, of course, with the text comes the visuals that you create in your head. I didn't need that. I really didn't need those visuals at all, and I found that the most difficult thing about it, trying to get those visuals out of my head.
Once you've done it once, then you just go and do it again. The fact that I got away with it, and the fact that I had to lie about it, was just an integral part of the activity that I was involved in. I became better and better at hiding that. There were a couple of times when I slipped up and nearly got caught out along the way, and that simply just served me to get better at hiding again. It's almost just like that's what I did.
We were separated for 5 months. Things took a turn, I suppose. I got a phone call one morning from him, and he was just distraught. He was beside himself. He was crying. He said, I don't deserve to live. The conversation turned into, I don't want to lose you, da-da-da-da, I don't want to lose the kids. I was torn, couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe the position I was in.
I just had my 21st birthday, and I was walking through the university grounds with my friend, and that was my first sight of him. It was sometime after that my friend said to me, he really fancies you and he wants to go out with you, and I was just like blown away. Why would he be interested in timid little old me? He was funny, he was charming, he certainly could be caring. He was everything that I was really looking for in a husband.
From the outside, people, I think, saw me as a successful person, settled and happy, both professionally and personally. But this serial cheating was actually ruining my life. I was being unfaithful 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was becoming addicted to cheating, to that act, to that lifestyle, and to everything that came with that. To be able to do this, you have to be a good liar as well. I very rarely spent a night alone. I got that used to doing it. I got that desensitized to doing it, that guilt, the feeling of guilt sort of diminished, as did any potential feeling for shame.
I felt that I had to give it a chance because we had a young family, and I loved him. It deserved effort. An affair can genuinely be a mistake, a lapse of judgment or whatever. It can genuinely be a mistake, and it was never meant to happen. I said to him, well, if we try again, we need to get help. We did a year of marriage counseling, and then he carried on and did 6 months of individual counseling. When we started over again, we were very conscious of the fact that we didn't want to go back to where we were before because obviously there was a problem. And I had to learn to trust him all over again. We were rediscovering each other, rediscovering our love for each other, rediscovering our love for our family. And so much so that we decided to add to that family.
The divorce was very difficult for me because I don't like failure. When I left, I genuinely believed I would walk straight into something else, and I'd started dating. The type of guy that I was going for, the charismatic businessman in a suit, very well educated, passionate about things, enthusiastic about life, those sort of men, but bizarrely unavailable after 5 o'clock and never around at the weekends. And I realised that I was probably dating married men and just not realising it at the time. I realised that the relationship I had with them was actually very easy because they didn't bother me too much. They didn't ask where I was going all the time, and I had my weekends free.
The first 2 or 3 years of our marriage were good. Our daughter came along. He was not around very much. At the time, he was working a lot, long shifts away from home. But I guess I really enjoyed being a mum and bonding with my daughter. I guess I didn't notice how much he was just not around. You know, who was I to complain about that when he was out there providing for us?
There was a definite sense of now a lack of interest in sex from my wife. I was constantly counting about how much sex that we were having. Each time that we didn't have sex, it felt like she was rejecting me. It felt like she didn't want me. It felt like it just hurt. When you use sex as a sense of connection, when you don't get it, it's painful. It really hits you deeply. The women who I ended up sleeping with, it was just everything that I needed. Somebody just to say to me, I want you.
When I date somebody, I make an extra effort to be interesting and funny, listen to him, be a good friend, make sure that you look nice, make sure that you do something quite memorable. And because of that, I think it takes them away completely from the mundane lives that they've got. We go and have a few hours of total escapism.
I'd say maybe after my daughter turned 1, the intimacy between us kind of stopped, but again, it was more, we were like ships passing in the night. It went from a healthy sex life up until the 3rd child, and then after that, it just kind of became non-existent. Yeah. He became different, irritable, just getting really agitated about the slightest things. Became very secretive, went out, disappeared for hours on end. And I asked him point blank, are you seeing somebody else? And he said, are you crazy? I would never do that after the damage I caused the first time.
Started a new relationship with a work colleague called Anna. We both agreed that we had a connection that we hadn't found with anybody else before, and that we thought we never would. There was something about Anna that made me fall in love with her, and I've never had a feeling like that before. However, I was still accessing these dating websites. I would sometimes arrange to meet women to have sex with at a time when Anna and I were not due to spend time together. Why was I putting something, a relationship that I really cared about and really wanted to succeed, why was I putting that at risk by doing stupid, insane, selfish things? But it didn't matter how many times I told myself that. I may be able to go 2 or 3 days, but again, the need, and it felt like an overwhelming need to message people, to seek out that sexual contact. And it got to the point where I was so reliant that I was now using a computer at work, a work computer, to access these websites.
He was working really long hours, and he would phone me at the time that I expected him home, and he'd say that he'd got to work late. Kiss the kids goodnight for me. I'll see them in the morning. And for quite a while, I didn't resent that at all. He always used to say to me how important marriage was to him, and I believed him. He could tell me all sorts of things that would lead me to suspect that he was the perfect family man who just had to work really hard all the time. He was just never around. He wasn't a good father to them. They needed him. In my eyes, they needed him, and he was just never there. So I've pretty much felt like a single parent.
At that point in time, we had agreed that we were going to do a temporary separation. I had something telling me that I had to look at the sat-nav. Had a look, and there was a new address there that I didn't recognize. I walked up to the front door of the house, and I looked in the glass window pane next to the door there, and I could see his shoes on the inside of the door. So I walked in, unannounced. I could hear them laughing, without a care in the world, obviously. And they didn't even see me. I said, "Are you serious? Do you have anything to say for yourself right now?" And he went, "No." Could have cared less. You know, my husband had no remorse. No remorse, no self-hatred. He said that our marriage was over anyway. I didn't know our marriage was over. That requires a conversation. So I left there, and I didn't react at all. The drive home, I was silent. The kids were in the car, so I couldn't cry. And then I got home, and my friend helped me situate the kids, and then I absolutely lost it. I just couldn't believe this again. It was shock. There wasn't a sickness feeling this time. I was just angry.
I spent 15 years in the police, but I kind of left quickly because I got to a situation where some of my supervisors were aware that I was sleeping with a colleague. My behaviour did end my career. I told everybody I was leaving to start a business. Truth was that there was a chance that my deck of cards was going to fall over. It was going to all implode for me, so I ran away.
I've asked this question many times of married guys of why they do this, but he's usually quite sad at the fact that she watches telly and she doesn't listen to him anymore. She might ask about his day, but once he's switched from work onto anything else, she's not interested. He goes home to talk about his kids and the skirting boards and the gas bills and everything else that's going on in his life. He likes the thrill of going out and doing something different. He quite likes the fact that we've got 100% attention focused on each other. And he likes the fact that he's important.
Went on a number of personal development courses. We were asked to sit and think about, was there any elements of us that we didn't like or that we regretted about our past that we would change now?
He'd written underneath, in his characteristic handwriting, "Been unfaithful." And it was like my world stood still. I just could not believe what I was reading. It was like my heart was leaping out of my chest. And I looked up at him and I said, "Who was she?"
There was no intention in me in that stage of telling her the full extent of my infidelities over the entire time of our marriage.
He said, "She was just a woman I met about 10 years ago. It was just sex. It was nothing more than that, just sex. I wanted to know everything. When it happened, if she was pretty. I wanted to know if she was slim. I wanted to know if she was clever. I wanted to know if she was everything that I didn't believe that I was." I can remember just sitting on the bed crying. I made the decision he'd got to leave. Just like, leave, get away from me. I can't deal with this.
I remember we'd just come back from a holiday in France, and even though we'd had a wonderful time, Anna, you could tell that something wasn't right. She said, "Tom, I know." At which point I thought about sort of turning around and running away. I thought about being angry and trying to deny it, but instead I sat down next to her on the grass and I just said that I was sorry. I said it had been something that had gone on for a long time. I actually had an overwhelming desire to answer truthfully, but if I told her everything, it would be making it real, and I would have to live with that shame. And I didn't think I could live with that shame. That's the first time I've used the word shame, and that's probably the first time I felt shameful about what I'd done. She said to me she thought I was unwell and that actually I needed help, because to be doing what I was doing was insane.
The new man in my life, I was very happily married for 12 years. It was completely different to my previous relationship. It was calm, there was no drama, everything was straightforward. It was a perfectly ordinary evening, and I thought, oh, I know whose birthday it is today. And to this day, I don't know what possessed me. It was almost like a little devil whispering in my ear. And for some reason, I wrote a text to my ex, the person who has left me, and it said, "Happy birthday!" And as soon as I pressed send, I regretted it instantly. I regretted it. I felt that, oh my goodness, what if my husband finds out? Just never do that again. And after a couple of minutes, there was the ping of a message. The pull was too strong. I just could not resist him. So I lied to my husband. I told him I was going abroad for a meeting. But actually, I was going to meet my ex in secret. So I flew to Italy. He saw me and he ran towards me and he gave me the biggest hug, and we were both in floods of tears. He just said, "You are more beautiful than you ever were." And everything just unraveled from there on. How can I do that? Am I a monster? How could anybody do that to a perfect husband and basically a perfect family? And it did cause chaos. And we basically, in one night, me and my lover, we've obliterated 2 fully functioning families.
With the help of Anna, she found a psychotherapist for me, and I started having psychotherapy, which was really helpful and really beneficial to me. There are no excuses, there are never excuses, but there are reasons, I suppose. I think the trauma of my dad passing away when I was 13 was quite sudden. He passed away of a heart attack. It did shape my future. We didn't really discuss my father's death. We just found it easier not to discuss it. I became quite detached emotionally. I was this sort of quite angry person, that I had a lot of resentment towards the world, that actually, what's the point? We're all going to die at some point, so it doesn't really matter if I'm a bit reckless.
Pete contacted me, and for the first few times I ignored his phone call, but I think gradually I thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to just talk with him. I agreed to meet with him. I can remember actually we walked the streets at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he showed me this list, and the list had 23 names on it. Dates, and there were descriptions of where they'd met, how many times they'd had sex, how long it had gone on for, if it was anything more than a one-night stand. And I realised from the dates, I looked at the dates and realised it spanned our entire marriage right from when I was pregnant with our daughter.
The document itself was just horrific when you look at it in its entirety. It was just a catalogue of lies and deceit.
It was just like my heart had been ripped open. My world had just imploded. He started to cry, and he sobbed and sobbed and sobbed.
It just got to the lowest point that I've ever felt in my life. It was like everything that I'd been holding together just fell apart in that one moment.
Anna had told some of my work colleagues that I'd been on these websites during work hours. I'd been exposed for who I was and what I was. There was no hiding place. People knew. They dismissed me for gross misconduct. And I think this combined with Anna being so understanding and wanting to help and being so enlightened herself. And I think because I was in love with her, I did actually, for the first time in a long time, I did actually really want to change. But all of this very sadly led to Anna ending the relationship. And it was sort of utterly devastating. And out of all the consequences of even losing my job and being reported to my governing body, that was without doubt the most painful consequence.
As much as I missed him, and I missed him unbelievably so, the more difficult thing was having that future taken away from me. Was I naive? Potentially. Or was I a woman that was in love and didn't question things enough? Everyone's right to judge me. I feel like I went with my heart.
One day, I will find the right man for me, somebody who won't cheat. I've seen why men cheat, and I would hope that I wouldn't be the reason for a man to cheat.
One of the things that most of us don't consider is when someone else is going to be the dad to your kids. I remember walking up to the pub last summer with my kids and her partner and thinking, okay, this is us as a family. This is the modern family.
In the 3 years that we've been separated, those kids and I have had some amazing memories. We've made some amazing memories. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't lonely every now and then, but for the most part, you know, things are good. And with every door, another one opens, you know, so.
My son didn't speak to me for the next 4 years at all. Love does have social consequences. The thing is, you don't realize what those consequences are when you are high on love, lust, adrenaline.
Nikki would have had every right to have just thrown me out and moved on to pastures new, but she decided to react differently.
I just had had this moment of clarity. This was not about me and my failings. This was all about Pete and his pain. He needs help. Instead of being the wounded, hard done by wife, I could be the person who helped him. It was like all of a sudden I realised the true meaning of unconditional love in a marriage.
I was really shy as a child, nervous, scared of everything.
The lowest point for me was that day I didn't get that job.
I felt lonely. I missed my mum and dad.
When my grandmother actually died, I couldn't just go on enjoying life.
My mum and dad were both there, and it was just awful. They were both really upset, screaming at each other, crying.
I was full of anxiety. No one had ever taught me how to deal with negative emotions before.
I was always slightly self-conscious about my body, even when I had no reason to be. I never felt I looked like everyone else. I would look at someone who was perhaps bigger than me or the same size as me, but in my head I was a lot fatter than them. I was always bigger than them, I was more wobbly than them. So I wouldn't take my blazer off in school even on the hottest days because of how I felt I looked, because of one comment.
I was really shy as a child. Nervous, scared of everything, scared of crossing the road, scared of my rabbit escaping and being eaten by the dog, scared of going to school, scared of talking to anyone. I had 6 older brothers and sisters. I think because the house was so chaotic, I wanted to be very controlled and very tidy. From a very early age, I had this knot of anxiety in my stomach. You feel it in your gut.
As a child growing up, this is back in the 80s, would I say I was competitive? Probably with a capital C. I enjoyed sport of all things. Running was a natural sport for me, if you like, which I discovered I was good at. Everything changed for me when my grandmother died, when I was sort of 15. She was the first person I'd ever lost. That was the first time I'd experienced death. You know, I didn't know what I should be feeling. I almost felt that I should know how it should feel. I do remember struggling to understand how everyone else was just carrying on as normal. And it was like I wanted to stand up and say, hang on a minute, don't you realise what happened?
We lived in beautiful countries all over East Africa. I come from a family where you were conscious of the far greater suffering of other people. People were starving, feeling sorry for yourself, moaning, whinging, whining. It's just not encouraged. It was always a given that my sister and I would go off to boarding school. I felt lonely, missed my mum and dad. I didn't feel happy. There was something was missing. For some reason, believed that containing my emotion was a good idea. I didn't tell my family. I think I was probably depressed.
I remember one morning I was having toast and marmalade, and one of my sisters said to me, do you know how many calories are in toast and marmalade, and that's gonna make you really fat? From that moment, I never ate anything again without thinking of how many calories it was. I just wanted total control over my body.
We ate a lot at boarding school. There would be huge blocks of cheddar cheese, giant industrial-sized pots of chocolate spread. And it served the purpose for me then of stopping me thinking about where I was and what I was feeling. Eating all this food made me gain weight. There was a girl in the house who told me that there was a way she used of getting rid of the food she had eaten. She would eat as much as she liked and then make herself sick afterwards. And it was this kind of mind-blowingly simple solution. The mechanics of it were a bit confusing to me. What finger did you use? How did you do it? And there's a little wiggly bit at the back of the throat. Do you push that down, or do you lift it up? Or what's the best way of making yourself vomit?
It all started with the day at school. I was playing football, which was something I was never very good at. Got pinned up against the wall by this other kid at school who called me a fat queer. And I remember everyone being really horrified and asking me if it was okay that he called me queer, and I really wasn't bothered. But the fat bit stuck with me, which everyone else had ignored because I wasn't actually fat. But to me, that broke my heart, and it was just all I could hear from that moment on was fat. On the way home from school that night, I bought a couple of bars of chocolate and a couple of packets of crisps and took them home and hid in my bedroom. And it was my little secret, something that no one else knew about.
My childhood was really great, actually. We were brought up in Dundee. We just had what we thought was just such an amazing family life, you know. Everything seemed perfect. But I come in one night to the house, and Mum and Dad were both there, and it was just awful. They were both really upset, screaming at each other, crying. My dad wasn't paying bills. We were about to get house repossessed. He'd had affairs. I was only 13 at the time. Mum was very depressed, sometimes suicidal. I started to avoid going home. I'd be hanging around parks with homeless people in the dark on my own. I didn't care if I lived or died, actually, to be frank, at that point. I was very friendly with this Italian family, and they asked me to go to Italy with them. I was on a beach, and I turned round, and I don't know, and I still don't know to this day if I imagined it, but I thought someone said my bum was big. And I literally felt a snap going off in my head. I can physically remember the moment, the exact context, everything about it. That was it. That was the very, very moment I became anorexic. What I started to see all of a sudden in the mirror was a fat, horrible, worthless girl. So what she needed to do was lose weight, because that would make her good at something. My mission was to become the best anorexic in the world.
Growing up, I'd always been good at athletics. I did the long jump, the 4x100 relay. I started puberty roughly around the age of 8. By the time I was 10, I was fitting into adult clothes, and I was wearing a 34 double D bra. I looked like a grown woman with a baby face. I hated my body at that age. I hated it. And I would have done almost anything to get the body I had before back. I was full of anxiety. No one had ever taught me how to deal with negative emotions before. If anything that made me feel uneasy happened, I ate. It was all, for me, it was all that I had. I didn't have anything else.
Well, I went to an all-girl high school, and I think suddenly I was with girls who wore bras, they were pretty, some of them had had sex. So it was all quite terrifying. I didn't join in the same way. I've always lived in fear of being in a social situation where I have to eat. Because I've always been deaf, I didn't want to go to the party. I didn't want someone to come up and talk to me because I couldn't hear them. And by retreating from Sunday lunchtime or the tea party or lunch at school, it sort of got me out of all those situations. It's not until you become anorexic and avoid food you realise how many events revolve around food.
I started to control every single calorie. I had to go to libraries and work out the grams per calorie, kilojoules. If a single piece of hunger came into my head, it was quashed immediately with more exercise or a drink of water, a cigarette. It became so bad that I used to have a pen pal, and I got a stamp to put on the envelope, and I was suddenly aware that as I went to lick it that actually that's a sweet substance. That must clearly have a calorie in it that I hadn't been aware of. I then was suddenly thinking of calories that you weren't aware of, you know, that vicariously you could be putting on weight without you noticing. So I started to panic that air might have calories in it. I knew this was ridiculous, but I had to do it because it was the only way I was going to not get fat by breathing.
When my grandmother actually died, I couldn't just go on enjoying life because that had almost seemed disrespectful as if she hadn't existed. My very unnatural reaction was I felt that I could better cope if I was somehow in pain. Why should I restrict food? I don't know. It was one of my staples. You know, I didn't have those other avenues of drink, drugs, to abuse myself with, I guess. You know, what started off as small restrictions, by 3 or 4 years' time, I cut out breakfast altogether. Breakfast never existed. A couple of cups of coffee. What I'd become and what I was doing was now a way of life.
Goodness me, to be an identical twin and to have an eating disorder, not fun. My first memory of Margaret is quite distinct. I can remember being in the pram with Margaret in a very big, fat maroon pushchair. A physical awareness at the age of 2 and 3 of your twin, you know, being next to you. My twin was 5 minutes older than me, and she always said if we were princesses, she'd be queen. So, but we were very alike in lots of ways. We looked alike. And we didn't have any need for friends. We knew we had to go to university, we didn't want to go. It was going to be the first time that we'd been apart for any length of time. When I got to my university, more or less didn't like anything about it. I had a feeling of absence and just feeling as if everything was wrong. I think it was classic separation anxiety. I couldn't enjoy anything. We wrote each other copious letters, and we would catalogue nearly everything that we ate. By the end of the year, Margaret had become very much aware of the fact of how much more than me she was eating. When we were apart, and we weren't eating the same, something would seem to go wrong somewhere.
I couldn't wait to go to London because then I could completely control everything that went into my mouth with no one watching me. I really wanted to be a model. I went to see Lorraine Ashton, who was the most famous model agent of the day. And she asked me how tall I am, and I'm tall enough, and I'm really young, you know. And she said, yeah, but she said, the problem is, she said, your skin is actually weeping. But my skin was so bad because the body just starts to break down, really. I know now that I didn't have the right nutrients, but at the time you think, it's because I'm not using the right skincare products. And I didn't think I was ill.
For me, never at any point was my restriction of food about thinking somehow slim was attractive and I was overweight. By my mid-20s, I'd now got my first apartment. I'd moved out at home. I would try to do anything to keep myself busy. I actually, although I was working full-time, I went and got a weekend job as well, so that I didn't have time to eat. Life became focused very, very narrowly on what I was eating, nearly 24/7. So friends were secondary, what was on telly was secondary. Harming yourself became the focus of your life. The running continued. You know, you could cope with not eating, you were in a certain amount of pain, but it wasn't until you tried to exercise or run that it really hurt. I had to work at it. When things were as bad as they could be, I was under 6 stone in weight. I was frightening to look at. My eyes were very, very sort of big because they were hollow. My skin was literally stretched across my bones. If I was out with my mum, people cannot help, if they see something peculiar, odd in the shape or look of somebody, they will stare. And that used to be really painful for mum. That never stopped hurting.
Once I hit my early 20s, I lost all control over it. The weight started to creep on, and when it did, I started to panic because I knew people would know what I was doing, they'd know my secret, and I became terrified, which, when I got scared, I turned to food even more. So I became trapped in the cycle of binge eating and guilt. I had no clue that it was the start of an eating disorder. Our Liverpool office closed down and I was relocated to London. Being down south, everyone was making a new life for themselves there. They'd all go to the pub, all go for dinner together. I'd pretend I had plans, I'd pretend I was already going out with people, I already knew I was doing something that night, and just eat on my own. When I was at my worst in London, I was eating between 10 and 15,000 calories a day. I would go out of a morning, breakfast from McDonald's, head to the supermarket, get the week's shopping, as well as crisps, chocolate, and I would order a takeaway that night as well. Maybe a Chinese banquet for 5, to the point where I got to nearly 30 stone. I wouldn't admit to myself that I needed help, although I was as fat as I was. But I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't breathe, as if I laid down. The fat around my neck would start to choke me. I'd have problems with my thighs rubbing together and I'd bleed, and sometimes through jeans that would have rubbed.
Towards the end of my first year university, Margaret and I had calorie counters books. It was a complete sort of Wikipedia of calories. You know, you name it, it was in there. We quickly became experts, even to the point of knowing if you had 2 different types of sliced bread, we would know the difference. We added everything up. It was meticulous. When we were at our worst, we would become upset if we thought the other one was eating less than we were. We became competitive, and that's something that I very much regret.
When I first arrived at Oxford, my bulimia changed from being something that I at least felt like I was moderately in control of to being something that was completely and utterly outside of my control. That's where it turned into a chronic illness. Superficially, I was functioning, friends, boyfriends, handing in my essays. It was as if that I was 2 separate characters, really. It felt as if I had basically like a demonic alter ego, is how I would describe it, which was this sick bulimic person that was constantly pricking at me. This battle against the impulse to drop out and run to the nearest supermarket, buy a bag of food, lock my door, and carry it out.
When I became editor of Marie Claire, I thought, this is fantastic. This is where I want to be. And all the models are so beautiful. You would think, wouldn't you, entering the world of catwalk and backstage, it would validate you being anorexic and being thin. You're still not quite good enough because you're not as tall and you're not as young. There's still room for improvement. Do you see what I mean? So you're never... The anorexic is never happy with herself. Your body's not your friend, it's something you battle with. I enjoyed feeling hungry. I had so much energy. That feeling in my stomach, it doesn't feel empty because it's full of knots and butterflies and fear. So it's already full up. Now, I've now just thought of something that I haven't thought of before, is that maybe when I've always felt fear, it wasn't fear, it was hunger.
By the time I was 11, my mum had at least 3 breakdowns, and that contributed a lot to me feeling bad about myself. The only thing I ever really looked forward to was chocolate. You know, when I was little, my mum would buy 2 bars of chocolate, one for her and one for me. So I think I've always associated chocolate with feeling happy. If it could have been another food, it could have been pizza, it could have been rice, but it's because I think of the emotional connection that I hold with chocolate, because I hold it with feeling happy and being with my mum. Chocolate was the only way that I felt calm. I would probably eat 10 bars in a day, easily. I think though my parents knew, and they tried to police what I ate. Dad, he actually went to the bin and showed me how many wrappers there were, and they said, this is what you eat in a week, and that I need to lose weight. I would scream, I would shout, I would tell them to leave me alone. They didn't really understand what was going on with myself, but neither did I. Binging was an escape. It was the only point in my day where I could stop thinking and stop feeling. I can only describe it as heaven.
The idea of buying something, eating it, and throwing it up, there's kind of nothing more pointless and wasteful. But bulimia is very addictive. I still find it upsetting. In a binge, you might eat 2 packs of biscuits, maybe 3, half a loaf of bread, a whole cake, 3 or 4 pastries, a pot of cream. The first few bites of food is pleasure. After all, this is the point. It's like I'm gorging myself, I'm feeding on this delicious food. Within such a bitterly short period of time, it's turned to, what the hell am I doing? I can't believe I'm doing this again. It is really painful to be so full. Once it's all over, it's actually kind of a relief. You've done it. Oh, thank God for that. It's all out. It's all flushed away. But it is exhausting. It's exhausting. There's something quite anarchic about that behavior where I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway.
I used to run a few miles to Covent Garden. I did 4 hours body conditioning. I never looked at the mirrors at the front. But I think I glimpsed myself in these pink ballet tights by mistake, and that's what frightened me. They weren't model thin or Twiggy thin, they were like beyond thin. There was a bit of me that was a bit reasonable, perhaps, that thought, you know, you're just going to kill yourself here. Went to my GP. He referred me to Bart's. The only advice I got from the hospital was, you eat 3 meals a day, you eat sweets in between, you eat meat, and we're going to give you steroids. And that made me put on weight and made my breasts grow. I didn't want to have breasts. I didn't want to have a period because that seemed quite messy. I think it's also about remaining as a child.
My weight fell to 4 stone. I was very skeletal and my skin had gone really blue. It was like paper thin over the bones. My hair was obviously a mess. My tongue went black. Actually, I stopped completely eating for a month. I'd stopped drinking too. It got that bad that they had to section me under the Mental Health Act. They couldn't get any veins to get bloods out. They couldn't get the cannulas in. They couldn't put drips in. Everything was dehydrated. I just hated the people that were trying to save my life at that point because I didn't want to be saved. I was screaming at them. I was telling them to f*** off, leave me alone. How dare you touch me? I was kicking out. I was lashing out. I was saying things I would never say. This wasn't me. I was given a lot of antipsychotic medication and a lot of very calming medication. So a lot of that really dulls down your senses so they can start bringing like little food pieces and you can hopefully start. So yeah, slowly, weight does trickle on, but it's a very, very fine balancing act they have to get right.
I think we were both aware that things were very wrong. I'd managed to get down from about 10 stone down to early 6s. During this time, the word anorexia began to be part of the language. One of the symptoms was that you looked blue and you were cold. And we knew at that time that's what we were both. We looked quite blue and we were cold all the time, which we weren't eating. At that point, GPs did not know what to do if somebody presented with anorexia. You were met with disapproval. You know, you were silly little girls. You know, what were you doing? And I was actually told by one doctor, who was quite sweet actually, he said he thought I'd got a greyhound metabolism. No, that's not true. We got a new GP and she was very positive. And I always remember the first time we went to see her. And she said, has anyone ever said to you, anorexia isn't your fault? I can just remember my mind and my body just reeling to think, you know, maybe, you know, gosh, you know, somebody's actually talking to us and understanding it. And we just went, oh. And she talked to us about the fact that, you know, it could be genetic and that we were identical. So that was a huge breakthrough, you know, in our thinking. Gradually, slowly, without us realising it, we were on the up.
Things changed for me. I got a cold, which turned into a bit more a cough. I had to accept I probably had to go and see the doctor. They suggested that I be admitted to hospital. Got quite bad, severe pneumonia in the right lung, and the right lung has actually collapsed. I could tell the seriousness in their eyes, I think, because clearly, although again, nobody ever talked to me in hospital about the eating disorder, but clearly the reason they'd have been so worried about the collapsed lung and the pneumonia was because I had nothing to fight anything with. I think that was the first time that I thought, you know, death, it might happen. I wanted to do anything that I could do. Almost I was trying to panic eat and I would do anything to put things right because I was that worried. You know, I realised how desperate it was.
I went to the GP and said, I can't stand my breasts, booked me into a plastic surgeon. And I remember I had to take my top off for the plastic surgeon. I'd never taken my top off in front of anyone else before in my life, and I was 29, which is quite funny. There's one thing that the nurse said to me when I sort of came round from the operation. you'll never have any sensation in your breast from men, from sex. And I thought, I'm never going to have sex. Are you mad? And then he said, you'll never be able to breastfeed. And I'm never going to have children. So I didn't really have any female hormones. You're not ovulating because once a woman becomes below a certain BMI, things start to sort of shut down. People don't realise how far away from normal life you are. And even though I was in so much pain and it cost me lots of money and there was blood seeping through my t-shirt, I was thrilled, happy as I could possibly be happy. I was back to being a teenager again.
I asked my mum to send me to fat camp because we all know that America has an obesity problem and they're the experts. It was a great experience. I was going to the gym, I was eating very healthily. I lost a bit of weight, I lost about 20 pounds in 4 weeks and I had a great time, but the weight creeped back on. When you actually have an eating disorder, it's not the behavior that is the problem, it is your emotional dependency.
The lowest point for me was that day I didn't get that job. I'd gone for an interview and started talking about terms and conditions, and then they would see me arrive dripping with sweat. And they rang me less than 10 minutes later when I'd just got back to the train station to go home to London and told me that I wasn't successful at the interview because they didn't think I was the right fit for the company. And I was stood at the platform and there was a train coming at quite high speed and I went to step off the platform because I thought I just can't cope with this anymore. Got a text off a friend asking when I'd be home, and I just thought, I want to be involved in life again. I want to be with my friends. I don't want to be alone or dead.
When I was living in London, the illness was just continuing pretty much unchecked. And by then it had been going on for years. I had coped with so much that one tiny trigger eventually caused the whole thing to explode. And it was tiny. I missed a bus. I lost it. I found myself screaming. I just lost control of myself. I managed to jump into a taxi. And I suddenly realized that there was a little disembodied voice coming from my bag, and it was my sister on the phone. So in all of that chaos, I had somehow dialed her number. So she had heard everything that happened. I called my parents and I said, I need help. Can't do it anymore. And that was the beginning of the end. Yeah. Thank God.
There was a brief window where I could have been sort of normal. And I thought it was going to happen, and that was on my wedding day. I had everything in place for it to be a new start, really. I had the honeymoon, but I couldn't eat a thing at my wedding, and I didn't eat the cake. And so I just knew, well, it's just over, isn't it? I can't even enjoy a piece of cake on my wedding day. My husband was quite good for me, really, because he called me chubby. Because that's funny, really, because he meant it as funny. He didn't mean to be nasty. I didn't have sex until I was about 32. And that was in a blackened room. And the room had to be so dark. This is so funny. The room had to be so dark so he couldn't see me. I didn't really blame him going off with other women at all, because I'm very difficult.
I came out of hospital, I'd done a massive amount of learning in a very short space of time. Clearly, the nutrition I was putting into my body was making a difference to the way my mind worked as well. Running, as you gathered, a really strong and positive thing when I was at school. It remained with me through all those dark days, 20 plus years later. And I said, I'm going to run a marathon. That's what I'm going to do. You know, that was a pivotal moment, I think, in my recovery, because the answer came through, and I'd been accepted to run the Paris Marathon for Macmillan in 2009. I could not let them down. Food, you know, what had been this big now was tiny and insignificant. Food was merely the fuel. I needed fuel to be able to do this. And I ran that marathon. Mum and Dad were there. And, sorry. I had something to be proud of. For the first time in my life, I had a flicker of self-esteem. And I will, forever be grateful for that minute, Very lucky.
When I got out of hospital, I was so much better physically and mentally, but unfortunately, all that work that the hospital had done just unravelled as soon as I stepped in the door. I ran back to anorexia like a child needs its mother. When I was readmitted to hospital, I had decided that I was going to commit suicide this day. I had this one toilet was where I used to go. And just as I was about to do it, I heard a patient crying going into the cubicle next to me. And the sound of her getting upset really brought my focus into view. Christ, if she finds me in a minute, my blood trickling out here, it's going to really, really knock her off. And of course, all the thoughts of my mum and my dad and my sisters came in, and I started to be aware of people and what was I doing to them, which was an amazing breakthrough for me. I didn't have that before, and I think it's because I was so malnourished, I wasn't able to think of their feelings or how it would affect them directly. Because anorexia is such a socially isolating illness, I had to go into a rehab unit. They taught me life skills about how to even cook, how to buy food. That was the only way I knew how to integrate back into society.
Actually, my father found an eating disorders unit on the internet. Kind of all my life, I probably viewed him as someone who has this vice-like control over his emotions, and I probably aspired to that. And then we were having a conversation about how the therapy was going, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm afraid you're just like me." And he described these grey moods that he has. And he said, "I've always had to work to be positive." I think what was helpful about that was understanding that it's okay to struggle. It's normal.
It was the Christmas just after I'd moved home, and I was sat on my own and thinking, I can't live like this. I realised I did want to do something about this. By next Christmas Eve, I was going to be thin. I started eating well. I decided I wanted to have weight loss surgery because I wanted to speed up the results. Once the weight loss had started, I'd started seeing a counsellor because I realised I needed to tackle the underlying issues as well as the weight.
When we were in the throes of the eating disorder, if I use that word, we had no idea about the long-term mental or physical consequences. We didn't know at the time, apparently, anorexia can impact on your immune system because Margaret was very prone to infection. She went into hospital. Things just began to literally fall apart. After Christmas, Margaret developed septic pneumonia. She rapidly deteriorated. The antibiotics they tried everything, every antibiotic there was, but it just doesn't seem to, whether she just didn't respond. When they switched everything off, I could just sort of feel everything, it was like sort of a draining feeling. That was it. So...
My relationship with my body right now is still rocky. I do need to lose weight for health reasons. Where am I now in my recovery? In the grand scheme of things, I am probably halfway there.
I'm very careful to stay well. Feeling I have is if I'm a survivor, there has to be a meaning for that. It can only be that, I survived for a reason.
I don't think there is a cure for what I went through. I'm in a relationship now that I'm very happy with. If I get the urge to binge, I will talk about it and be honest and not give that any more power over me.
I remember my therapist saying this to me, that this illness was not a product of a lack of self-control or a weak will. It was a mind-blowing realization. I have been completely free from any kind of eating disorder for 10 years. It's history now.
Anorexia is this overwhelming power and energy, but I managed to turn it into a hugely positive thing. I want to show others there is hope, no matter how bad it can be, and what a life you can have.
I can never see a point where I'm not going to be aware of what's going in my mouth. It's never going to happen. You still have to eat, but you still don't let it get out of control. Anorexia is the hardest psychiatric illness to recover from. What I do is I manage it so I can appear normal.
Year after year, I keep running my marathons. It's to say to those people who might think, once you've had an eating disorder, you've always got an eating disorder. You're wrong. You can beat it. Your Moment to Shine was the title. And I read it, and it said that I'd been selected to be a torchbearer for the 2012 Olympics. I rang my mum. She broke down on the phone. I suppose the actual torch itself almost, is a sign of that complete recovery.